ikut aku.
An old house on the outskirts of town. The house was much larger than I needed, but it had a certain appeal with its hardwood floors and large windows that let in the sunlight. It seemed like the perfect place to settle into after months of searching. The first few days were peaceful, just me and the quiet hum of a new beginning. But that tranquility didn't last long. On the third night, I noticed something odd. As I settled into bed, ready to end my day, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. I froze, trying to convince myself it was the house settling. It was an old place, after all, and old houses often creaked and groaned. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too regular, to be the house settling. They sounded like someone was walking around, pacing across the floor above me. I waited for a moment, listening intently, but the footsteps continued. I held my breath, straining to hear if anyone was actually upstairs, but I knew I was alone. The house was empty except for me, and I hadn't seen anyone move in. Yet the sound of footsteps kept coming slow, steady, and unnervingly clear. My heart started to race, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even though I knew there was no one there. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. I lay there, tense, hoping it was nothing more than my imagination playing tricks on me. But when the silence persisted, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over me. The house felt different somehow. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just adjusting to a new place, but the sound had been so distinct. It wasn't the wind or the house settling, it was the sound of someone walking. The next night, I made sure everything was locked up tightly before going to bed. I even left a light on upstairs, hoping that it would give me a sense of comfort. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard the footsteps again. This time they were louder, more pronounced. It sounded like someone was moving about in the hallway above my room, walking back and forth, as if they were trying to get my attention. My pulse quickened, and I sat up in bed, trying to convince myself that I was just hearing things. I grabbed my phone, shining the light toward the ceiling, half expecting to see someone standing there. But there was nothing. No shadows, no movement, just the faint sound of the footsteps continuing. I gathered the courage to get out of bed and check upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. But when I reached the top, the hallway was empty. There was no one there. Everything was still, and yet the sound of the footsteps had been so real, so vivid. I didn't know what to make of it. The next few nights were the same. The footsteps would start just as I was about to fall asleep, pacing back and forth upstairs. Sometimes they would stop suddenly, only to start again a few moments later. I tried calling a friend to stay with me, but they had work the next day, and I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting. I couldn't explain what was happening. It didn't make sense. Why would I be hearing someone walking around when no one else was there? I decided to investigate further. I spent the next day looking around the house, searching for any sign that could explain the noise. I checked the attic, the crawl spaces, and even the basement, hoping to find something that would put my mind at ease. But everything seemed normal. There were no signs of anyone being in the house, no hidden rooms or secret passages. Everything appeared to be exactly as it should be, and yet, every night, the footsteps would return. One evening I decided to stay awake and wait for the footsteps to begin. I wanted to hear it clearly, to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. As the hours passed, the house grew silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. But then, just as I thought I might get some sleep, the footsteps started again. This time they were closer right above me, as though someone was standing in the hallway directly overhead. I gripped the edge of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, too afraid to move. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and for a moment there was only silence. But then I heard something else. A faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It sent a chill down my spine. The scraping noise grew louder, as if something heavy was being moved from one end of the hallway to the other. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. Who or what could be up there? I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called a local investigator, hoping they could shed some light on what was happening. They suggested that I might be hearing house ghosts, a term they used for lingering spirits that cause disturbances in old homes. I didn't want to believe it, but the way the footsteps echoed through the empty house, the way they always stopped and started, felt too deliberate to be a simple noise. The investigator suggested that I spend the night with them, so they could try to find out what was causing the disturbances. The following night, I agreed to let the investigator spend some time in the house. We sat in the living room waiting, and soon enough, the footsteps began. They were louder now, as if someone was walking directly over our heads. The investigator didn't seem surprised, but I could see the tension in their posture. They took out a recorder and began to ask questions aloud, trying to communicate with whatever might be causing the noise. Then, as we sat there in the quiet darkness, a voice whispered from above us. It wasn't clear, but the words were unmistakable. Get out. The investigator's face went pale, and for the first time I felt a surge of terror flood through me. We weren't alone in his house. I was staying at a hotel for a work trip, a place I had visited before, so I was familiar with the layout and surroundings. It was a decent hotel, nothing too fancy but comfortable enough for the week I would be there. After long days of meetings and presentations, I would often return to the hotel in the evening to unwind. The lobby was always quiet in the evenings, with just a few guests coming and going. However, there was one man I began to notice, and his presence soon became something I couldn't ignore. At first, it seemed like nothing out of the ordinary. He was there every evening, sitting in the same spot in the lobby, reading a book or sipping a drink. He appeared to be in his late 30s with dark hair and a neat suit, which was unusual for a hotel lobby where most people were either in casual clothes or returning from dinner. Something about him, though, stood out. He never seemed to do much other than sit and stare at the entrance, as if he was waiting for something or someone. I couldn't tell if he was just another business traveler or if something was off. Over the next few days, I began to notice a pattern. No matter what time I returned to the hotel, the man was always there, in the same chair, doing the same thing. Whether it was late at night or early in the evening, he was always there, never changing his routine. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid, but it became increasingly hard to shake the feeling that he was watching me. When I'd walk through the lobby, his eyes would follow me, never looking away, and it made my skin crawl. I didn't know why he was staring at me, but it felt unsettling, like I was being observed. One evening, after another long day of meetings, I returned to the hotel, hoping to get some rest. I passed through the lobby as usual, but this time the man wasn't sitting in his usual spot. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I waited for the elevator, I couldn't help but notice him in the corner of my eye. He was standing near the entrance, watching me. My heart rate quickened, and I turned quickly to avoid his gaze. The elevator doors opened just in time, and I stepped inside, feeling a small sense of relief as the doors closed behind me. As I reached my floor and walked down the hallway toward my room, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. At first, I dismissed it, assuming it was just another guest returning to their room. But when I reached my door and fumbled for my key card, I heard the footsteps get closer. My heart skipped a beat as I turned, expecting to see another guest walking by. Instead, I saw him, the man from the lobby, standing a few feet away, looking directly at me. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment there was an uncomfortable silence between us. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, his eyes still fixed on me. Finally, he smiled a cold, almost predatory smile and said, "I think you dropped something." I glanced down at the floor, but nothing was there. Confused and uneasy, I stepped back, holding my key card tightly in my hand. I don't know what you mean," I stammered, not sure what to do. He took a step closer, and I felt a surge of panic rise in me. Something about his presence made my skin crawl. His smile never faltered as he spoke again, this time in a low voice that barely reached my ears. "You don't remember me, do you?" I froze. The words sent a chill through my spine. I didn't know who he was. I had never seen him before, not outside of the lobby, and I certainly didn't recognize him now. "I think you have the wrong person," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But before I could react further, he nodded as if he had expected that response and turned to walk away. I stood there, watching him, until he disappeared around the corner. My breath came out in shaky gasps as I quickly unlocked my room and hurried inside. I bolted the door behind me, my mind racing. What had just happened? Why had he followed me? And why did he make me feel so uneasy? I didn't sleep well that night. Every small noise in the hallway made me jump, and I kept replaying the interaction over and over in my mind. The next day, I left early for my meetings, trying to put it behind me. But when I returned to the hotel in the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I walked through the lobby, hoping to avoid the man, but as I passed through, I caught a glimpse of him again, sitting in his usual chair, staring at the entrance. It was as if he had never left. For the next few days, I stayed on edge. The man continued to appear every evening, always in the same spot, always watching. I began to change my routines, taking different routes to my room, hoping to avoid him. But no matter what I did, it seemed like he always knew where I was. I started to wonder if he had been following me all along, if he had been tracking my movements. But the more I tried to avoid him, the more I felt trapped, as if there was no escaping his gaze. Then, one night, he wasn't there. I walked through the lobby, expecting to see him sitting in his usual spot, but the chair was empty. I couldn't explain the sudden feeling of relief that washed over me, but I didn't question it. Maybe he had finally checked out or left for good. I returned to my room that night, locking the door behind me and falling into bed with the sense that I could finally relax. But the next morning, when I went to check out, I was told something that made my blood run cold. The receptionist mentioned that the man had checked out earlier that morning, right before I had arrived to pay my bill. But when I asked for a room number or any further details, the receptionist hesitated and told me that he didn't have a reservation under his name. No one knew who he was. I left the hotel in a daze, not fully understanding what had just happened. The man was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been followed, watched, or worse. And I never saw him again.